So welcome to our second session of Deep Jewish Insights from the Music of Fiddler on the Roof. I just have a few slides to share with you. I will just ask Jane Simon, do you see the slide okay? Because I can see you.
Yes.
Okay, great,
Yes.
thank you. Okay, so once again, welcome to the class. This is the second week. It's St. Patrick's Day. Maybe that's why his face is green. I really don't know. And Jewish Insights from the Music of Fiddler on the Roof. And as I said last time, my work here is supported by the Jewish Federation, and specifically my role as the community rabbi is made possible by Joel and Barbara Aronson and the Affordable Living Choices Trust, working through the Jewish Federation of Ventura County. If those of you that might be inclined to make a contribution, please do so, and you can either go to jewishventuracounty.org or on my website classes page, I have a link to their donation page. As I mentioned last week, I have a website, and if you go to the website and click on classes, I've now posted the recording of session number 1, and I'll be posting the recording of this session, but also, as I mentioned last time, assuming I remember this correctly, I will not be posting recordings that include the clips of the music or dialogue from the movie. That gives me problems on YouTube, and the PowerPoint slides are on there as well. Yeah, that's so that, please jot your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and we'll have a little bit of live questioning as well, but we're moving up toward 80 people, so it's a little hard for everybody to jump in. And then I think at the very end, we can have some brief general discussion time. And then, I'm in no rush to go somewhere. So if there are lingering questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And as I mentioned last time, I am giving a TEDx talk on Saturday.
Oh.
And if you go to TEDxoxnard.com, you can, I hope, figure out how to register for the program. There's a bunch of people talking, and we're talking about a variety of subjects. Certainly, that talk will be recorded, and I will be distributing it. And
could you give us the address again?
Sorry?
Give us the address.
Yeah, so the main thing is just TEDxoxnard, all one word, .com, and look for the program and reservations.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I am going to stop this share, and I think I have more people coming in, maybe not. Okay, so we're going to jump back into the music. Just for those of you that weren't here before, again, if you listen to the recording of session 1, you'll hear a bunch of introduction. So last time we went through the music of tradition, matchmaker, and if I was a rich man. Tonight we're going to be starting with the Sabbath Prayer. And before we start, I just want to alert you to some things to be on the lookout for. Watch the faces of the children, mainly the 2 youngest daughters. It's very interesting to see the awe with which they are facing Shabbat, with which they are welcoming the Sabbath. And of course, there's some glancing going back and forth because there's already romantic attachment that Tevye knows nothing about with both of his older daughter and his middle daughter. So they're looking at each other. And here we go. I am going to, thank you. Somebody suggested muting everyone. Yes, everyone is muted. And I'm going to pause the recording, and we are. Okay, we are back from the video of the Sabbath Prayer. So one of the things that's going on in, I would say, sort of a mystical interpretation of Shabbat is in the Talmud, they talk about a few things that are 1/60th. The reason for the use of the term 1/60th, shishim, is that the Babylonian number system was based on the number 60. That's, I believe, the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. And so the rabbi said that sleep is 1/60th of death, like a taste of death. Dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. And Shabbat is 1/60th, or a taste or a foretaste of the world to come. So what do they mean by that? We're getting a little glimpse of what the world will be like when the Messiah comes. All of our work is done, and there's literally nothing left for us to do, and it's Shabbat. In this concept, the reason that we don't work on Shabbat, the reason we don't spend money, is not because there's something horrible about working or spending money, but because we're pretending there's no work left to do in the world. We don't spend money because we couldn't think of a thing to buy even if we went shopping. We're pretending the world is perfect. So, this is a good illustration here in Anatevka. We're talking about a poor family, but yet the table is set beautifully. In the last little clip about Matchmaker, the girls were getting dressed. Everybody's putting on their finest clothes. You may remember, the idea that Tevye has to rush to get home for the Sabbath. Of course, it takes place at sunset, and everything is perfect. There is this custom of inviting strangers, so of course that's why they invite this the tutor that's going to tutor the girls. Why is he looking like a stranger? He's clean shaven. He doesn't look like a traditional Orthodox Jew. So that makes them a little nervous, but they certainly invite him. There is an interesting question in Judaism as to why we light Shabbat candles. It is the perfect example of how the rabbis jump in and add additional commandments and mitzvot. So in the Torah, it says, you shall have no lights in your habitation. You shall have no fires in your camps, in your habitation. Okay. So now the question is, what does that mean? Does that mean you should put out all the lights? I mean, typically at this time, you would have a lamp going, right? You would have, and even in ancient times, you'd have oil lamps. You'd have some kind of lighting going on at night in your homes. So the strict readers of the text, they are the Karaites, said, okay, what the rule really means is you should put out all the lights on Friday night. And as soon as the sun sets, you should have nothing burning. The rabbis who believed in an oral tradition, so here's the myth, and we're sticking to it. The myth is that when Moses was on Mount Sinai, Moses got an entirely second set of revelations. That's the oral law with the instructions, never write it down. Eventually it gets written down out of necessity, which is another interesting element of Jewish tradition. And one of those rules is that we light Shabbat candles, actually 18 minutes before sunset. So you had this battle between the strict interpretationists, strict constructionists, we might call it in modern jurisprudence, and those who would change the laws with the times. And the battle went on for about 1,000 years. And there still are very small groups of Karaites, but clearly the tradition now is that you light Sabbath candles just before the sunset. There's a couple of traditions about why we light Sabbath candles. One of them I don't like, one of them I do like. Why it's up to the woman. If there is no women in the household, then men can light Sabbath candles, but traditionally women light the Sabbath candles. And so the tradition I don't like is because of the woman's sin, namely Chava's sin in the Garden of Eden, Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden. The other tradition, which I do like, is the story that it was Sabbath. So the man and the woman were created on the sixth day. They're in the Garden of Eden. Maybe they're a little disoriented, but the weather's nice. Everything's good. Now the sun starts setting. Adam starts to panic, doesn't know what to do. Eve knows what to do. She lights Shabbos candles. That one I like. There's a wonderful tradition about closing your eyes. The woman closes her eyes. Here's the order when you light Sabbath candles. You light the candles, you close your eyes and say the blessing, and then you open your eyes. There's a bunch of different traditions about that. Here's the one that I most like. Most blessings, almost all blessings, you say the blessing and then you do the thing, right? Here's some water. You have wine, you have bread, you put on a tallis. Whatever the mitzvah is, you say the blessing and then you do the thing. But with Shabbat candles, the idea is once a woman says the blessing for lighting the Sabbath candles, she has taken on the Sabbath and she can't light the candles. So here's the trick. You light the candles, you close your eyes and you pretend that they're not lit. You say the blessing, you open your eyes and the candles are magically lit. So I like that one. Again, I hope you noticed how the sense of awe of the children looking at each other. Imagine how their lives change for a day in this time. You know, we're talking about a world of hard labor and hunger. And on the Sabbath, the table is beautifully dressed. Yeah, Cheryl is asking this question, and there are traditions about bringing in the light, and you may know these traditions better than I. So there's lots of different traditions relating to that. But imagine how different the Sabbath must have seemed to the family. The other thing, it's a beautiful blessing, and it actually has many Jewish concepts in the blessing, and the wording is actually very, very interesting. May God shield you from shame. There's a lot of liturgy which has this idea of protecting us from shame. May you be deserving of praise. The language again, I think is very beautiful and clear. It's not may you get praise, it's may you be deserving of praise. That's more important than actually being praised. And of course, keep you from the stranger's ways, and that's going to be the whole course of this discussion. And then I'll mention one more thing and then call on at least one of you that has a hand up. The idea also here is that look at the way Tevye is dressed, and Tevye is saying the prayers, and before, if you watch the movie, he's praying, and so very important concept in Judaism is literacy, particularly among men. Yes, there's this is a male-centered world, but there's absolutely this idea that that the men should be literate in their prayers. So I'll call on Gigi, and you need to unmute yourself.
So a couple of things that struck me in the Sabbath prayer is that may you be a shining name. I don't remember where I heard that. Your name is all you have. Your reputation. That one of the most important things, I think, in general, but also in Judaism, is your name. And I also thought it was interesting that they want the girls to be like Ruth and Esther, which Ruth was our first convert, and Esther, saved her people by not admitting she was a Jew instead of the matriarchs.
Yes. So that's a very good point. And what I would say is the blessing that we hear in the song is not the traditional Sabbath blessing. So the traditional Sabbath blessing for the women is exactly the one you noted that they didn't use. May you be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So that's how parents bless their daughters. The interesting one is, how does the parents bless their sons? You would think along those lines it would be, may you be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it's not. May you be like Manasseh and Ephraim. So who the heck are Manasseh and Ephraim? Manasseh and Ephraim are Joseph's two sons, and they don't have much to do with anything in the biblical narrative. They become half tribes, which is kind of interesting, if that sort of thing interests you. But may you be like Manasseh and Ephraim. So, whoops, hang on, I just messed this up. Okay, like Manasseh and Ephraim, one way of understanding this, which I like, is that Manasseh and Ephraim are the only brothers in Genesis that don't seem out to kill each other and hurt each other. So there's at least one model of two brothers getting along. Jay, I don't know if you had your hand up. You electronically, you actually raised the applause one, and I appreciate that. But knowing you, I know that you are actually going to ask a question. So go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. Thank you.
Good. Okay, let's go back to this closing your eyes before you say a prayer.
Closing your eyes before the woman lights the Shabbat candle.
Is that the only time you close your eyes?
No, you close your eyes. There's a tradition of closing your eyes in concentration when you say the Shema.
That's
Yeah.
where I'm at.
Yeah. No.
Tell me that.
No. I'm not trying to tell you anything relating to that.
Okay.
Let me finish.
I want to kiss the mezuzah on the door.
Okay.
Do I cover my eyes before I touch the mezuzah or
No.
after I touch the mezuzah?
Let me put it this way: you can do whatever you want as long as you
I do.
Okay. There is no Jewish tradition with which I am aware that suggests you should close your eyes before kissing or after kissing a mezuzah.
Okay,
The point I was making was not about closing eyes. It was she lights the candles first and then says the blessing.
Yes.
In every other mitzvah blessing, with one other exception, you say the blessing first and then you do the act. The other counterexample is when you immerse yourself for the first time in a mikvah for the sake of conversion. Because when you become a Jew in conversion when you dunk, and when you come up, you're Jewish. So you can't say the blessing before you dunk because you're not Jewish. So you can't say Vitzivanu, God has commanded us, because you're not part of us yet. So that's the other counterexample in conversion at the mikveh. A convert dunks first, comes up, and then says that blessing. It's kind of an obscure one. Okay, I am going to again mute everyone and pause the recording, and we're going on to the showing of To Life. This is actually a long clip. I'm sorry if we're having, I'm not sure why it may not be playing as well, but again, you can watch this on your own. So the thing I want to call your attention to in this clip is first, just to set the story. I hope you all know the story. The butcher, Leza Wolf, wanted to marry Zeitel, Tevye's oldest daughter. There's a very funny scene before this where Tevye thinks the butcher wants to buy Tevye's cow, but actually wants to acquire his daughter. So it's a very funny scene. And now they are excited about it, and they've agreed, and they're drinking to it. You'll see in the dance scene afterwards, which is extended, the non-Jewish people in the pub, and it's noteworthy that both Jews and non-Jews are in the pub. Another thing that's noteworthy is there are no women in the pub. It is strictly a male activity. Certainly, this is true in Morocco. I've spent time traveling there. You do not see women in coffee shops. At least outside on the patio, inside where they can't be seen from the street. But watch even the very sensitive nature of how frightened the Jews are and skittish the Jews are about interacting with the non-Jews. And once again, it's part of the theme of this whole story that Tevye will take the first step and actually dance with one of the locals. So So there's a lot to unpack in the clip we just saw, which was the wonderful song to Lifelechayan. And it was actually this clip that got me started on this journey of digging deeply into the music of Fiddler on the Roof. So for one thing, I did some research on what do people drink to in their, when you're going to have a drink. Different cultures drink to different things. So here's what I found. Let's see if some of you may have some of the ones that I didn't find. Typically, a very common one is drinking to health. So we have salud in Spanish and a votre sante in French. In many cultures, there's something to the equivalent of cheers. You've probably heard of the one skål in Norwegian countries, and it turns out Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and it turns out, according to at least what I found on the internet, and how could that possibly be wrong, that it means bowl, and they would pass a bowl around the table, and different people would drink from the bowl. And let's see. I'm sure I'm not saying this correctly. In Turkey, it's sayr ufay, which means to honor. In Japan, it's kanpai, empty the glass. In Moldovan, it's norok, to luck. So here's my question for you. Does anybody know another one? If you do, I will dutifully write it down. Whoa, what happened to my? Oh,
Kombe, Chinese.
do you know what it means?
Same thing as in Japanese,
Okay, thank you.
Chin chin, but I don't know what it means.
Oh,
My parents
good.
would always go chin chin.
Yeah, let me write those down and I'll look it up.
In Hawaiian,
In Hawaiian, it's what?
bottom, it's akole maluna, bottoms up.
Oh, Hawaiian. Okay, this is great.
How about Russia?
Nostrovia
Russia.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
or Prost.
Nastra, it's health, to your
Okay.
health.
Yeah, so there's a bunch. Yeah, that's health. Okay, good. Okay. I didn't find any other culture, interestingly, that has in their own language to life. So it's very interesting, and I think noteworthy, which is why I'm noting it, that in Judaism we drink specifically to life. There's also, you saw a lot of this Jewish tradition, and it's a Hasidic tradition of the nigun, a wordless song, which are wonderful, and and you don't have to know the words, which is the best part of it. So the main thing here, I want to talk about what is actually a very important in Talmud study, but maybe something with which you're not familiar, which is a rule of Talmud analysis called kal v'chomer. Kal means light, chomer means heavy. And we've discussed this in other classes, how the rabbis managed to manipulate the tradition to come up with what they want is not just they can do anything they want. There are very specific rules in the Talmud for how you analyze texts. And they're so important, they're actually part of the Orthodox morning liturgy. So a traditional Jew every morning would recite the 13 rules about Talmud analysis, and kal v'chomer is one of them. So here are the two examples of kal v'chomer. We know that God would like us to be joyful even when our hearts lie panting on the floor. How much more should we be joyful when there's really something to be joyful for? So, kal v'chomer. God would like us, I'm going to mute everybody. There's a little background noise. God would like us to be joyful when there's no reason to be happy. That's the kal. The chomer, how much more is it important to be joyful when we actually have something to be happy? That's a beautiful example of kal v'chomer. And there's another one which actually goes to the same musical notes. We'll raise a glass and sip a drop of schnapps in honor of the great good luck that favored you. We know that when good fortune favors to such men, stands to reason we deserve it too. Kal v'chomer. When guys like you, Tevye and Laser, are getting good fortune, and the implication is you're not such terrific guys, it stands to reason, Kal v'chomer, that we should have it too, because we're presumably better people. So those are beautiful examples of Kal v'chomer. This is known in Latin as an argument a fortiori, if I'm saying that correctly, from the stronger case. So actually, this one is relevant to Passover coming. Here's one example. The Torah tells us that Yom Tov, a holiday like the first day of Passover, is just like Shabbat, except that the food preparation is permitted. So you're allowed to prepare food on the first day of Passover, the first day of Shavuot, the first day of Sukkot. These are holidays, but they're not as stringent as Shabbat. In other words, the laws of Shabbat are known to be more stringent than those of Yom Tov. So then if something is known to be permitted on Shabbat, Kal v'chomer, it must be permitted on Yom Tov. Conversely, if something is known to be prohibited on Yom Tov, Kal v'chomer, it is prohibited on Shabbat. This may sound a little dry and legalistic. Actually, in Exodus, Moses, in his appeal to God, says when Moses is concerned about his being a stutterer, we don't know exactly what his speech defect is. He says, the Israelites would not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man that I am a man of impeded speech? And here's one that will make you think. In Leviticus, in chapter 18, there are lots of rules about prohibited sex between a man and a woman. And you are actually the rules of Leviticus in chapter 18, verse 10, prohibit sex with a man and his granddaughter, regardless of whether she's the daughter of one's son or one's daughter. Interestingly, and you might think alarmingly, Leviticus 18, the Torah does not prohibit sex between a man and his daughter. But the rabbis, of course, use the rule of Kal v'chomer. If you're prohibited from having sex from your granddaughter, who is more distant from you, you don't even have to say you're prohibited from having sex with your daughter because she is closer, Kal v'chomer. So I pointed out to you this idea of the mistrust between the villagers and the Jews, which is just fascinating. Even in the dancing, the Jews are holding hands with each other, and the villagers are going under their arms. And it points out another important element of Judaism, that we have to work out this balance. You might say, well, like a fiddler on the roof, of living with non-Jews and doing business with non-Jews, but keeping separate. Compared, let's say, to the Amish, where the tendency is much more to live completely separate and not so much interaction. So I will pause and say, and ask Beth. Beth and Gigi have your hand up. Go ahead. You need to unmute, Beth.
Gigi was actually waiting first. You want to let her go first?
I was going to let you go first because she already asked one thing. But
oh, okay. I have a comment about the dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they weren't afraid to dance while the Russians were there watching.
Mm-hmm.
But it was once that the Russians were dancing and trying to dance with them. But in some sense, it seems to me a little, do I want to say unusual, that they were okay to dance within themselves, even though the Russians were in the same room watching them. So it shows like a little less of a
they're
divide between the two.
They are in the tavern together. There's not a separate Jewish tavern and a tavern for the non-Jewish villagers. I have tried to really watch the clip to see whether the Laser Wolf is paying for the Russians' drinks. And I think so, but I'm not certain. So I'll call now on Gigi. Go ahead.
Well, what I love about this scene, Tevye is wasted. I mean, he is so drunk before he gets there. He's just he couldn't be happier and he's wasted, but he's also got that twinkle in his eye where he's adventurous. He's like, these guys are making an effort. Why not? And in the background, Laser Wolf is like, you can see on his face, it's like, no, we shouldn't be doing this. This is not a good idea. This is scary. And his, Tevye's got guys pulling him back.
Yeah.
He's the only brave one in the group.
Yeah. And it's very significant, in this whole, the subtext of this entire movie and show is Tevye crossing boundaries. Certainly Tevye's daughter's pushing him, but Tevye is willing to cross boundaries. And as you were saying, Gigi, he is wasted, but he's not so wasted that he doesn't know how to speak appropriately to the policeman. Sylvia and then Jerry.
Mine was the fact that I think music is a unifier. And at first, both peoples were not going to approach one another, but the music softened them. And at first they were both very tenuous, and then they really danced, and then they each danced the dance that is traditional to their people, to their culture. And I think that was sort of it showed this very well.
Yes, I certainly agree. Jerry.
Yeah, a couple quick observations. One, notice that when they were coming in, Laser Wolf was wearing a blazer. Tevye was more informal. Yeah, Tevye was very informal. Laser Wolf, the blazer, it's a psychological wall as well. When he gets in there, as you pointed out, Tevye shows implied flexibility in his attitude, right? Laser Wolf was more standoffish. He had the blazer. He thinks of himself in a different way as category. Now, also, once they started dancing, notice there was a less drunk Jew who was standing behind Tevye, restraining him.
Yes. That's like,
you really don't want to. You don't really be careful here. You're crossing a boundary here, which you can't come back from. And but it worked out okay because, as somebody pointed out, it's a neutral ground. This when they're off hours, their day jobs are done. It's night, and it's this neutral ground where they can act out this almost a fantasy of what their relationship they think it is. But when they leave, it's back to what it was. It's not, and then immediately to remind us of that, there's the part with the pogrom with this guy who, the comments that he makes, I commented, what a compliment. I mean, what a nice guy this guy is, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
who, it's very clearly to tell us this is who they are now,
And the fascinating thing is how the policeman doesn't get it.
Not at all. No.
He says, the compliment he pays Tevye, and the fact that he assumes that Tevye is joking by saying he wishes that he was a Jew. I will call on Jan's iPad, whoever would like, Bob or Jan, there. You need to unmute yourself.
It's Steve on here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you watch the scene, both halves of it all the way through, in spite of what he went through with the Russian, in spite of the fact that he was insulted, in spite of the fact that there's going to be trouble, the end of the scene is the fiddler playing "If I Was a Rich Man," and
yes,
Tevye is joyously dancing with him. I read that to be, today I am a rich man. I have a husband.
That's very nice.
Daughter, and that to me was the final resolution of the evening. Am I reading that wrong?
No. I think it's a great reading. And someone sent me a very long commentary on this question of what the fiddler represents, and a very powerful thing which I had missed in my own thinking about this is how beautiful the sound of violin music is. How it by itself can bring you to tears. So I sort of thought of the joyful nature and the fact that it's very portable and you can bring it, but it's also quite beautiful. Michelle and Richard.
Michelle, my bank. You just said that Tevye is breaking boundaries, in his behavior, and both his daughters do the same thing. One goes off, not to ruin the movie, but one goes off with the Russian boy, and the other, Laser doesn't get to marry her. I mean, she fights her father on what she wants. So also very independent in that way, like their father, you know?
And the youngest breaks a boundary that, it goes too far. But this is the story of the rigidity of tradition
Mhm.
and the temptations of modernity, and we're going to see that very much in the next clip as well. Murray.
The scene in the tavern reminded me of in World War II. There was an instance, in World War II, there's trench warfare, and I mean, they're using chemical weapons on each other.
I think you're referring to World War I, right?
Yes, in the
Yes.
most horrendous way. It's about World War I would have been like 10 years after this is supposed to be. And yet on Christmas Day, they all get up and they all celebrate. And I mean, they play soccer and it's like nothing's going on. And then boom, as soon as it's over, the timeout is over and they get back to it. And I just think that is the most frustrating kind of thing.
Yes, it's tantalizing. So I'm going to make an observation in a book, and I can't remember offhand the name of the book. Was by an Israeli, and I think it was something like The History of the Future. And the author makes a very profound observation in the introduction. I didn't like the book. I love the introduction. And what he says in the introduction is there are three constants to human history. Three things in human history that until very recently, everybody understood was a constant of our lives and would go on forever. Constant number one, war. For most of human history, nations were either at war or preparing for the next war, building the Maginot Line or getting ready to attack your neighboring tribe. Constant number two, plague. Everybody has always understood that we're between plagues, that a plague would break out, and we're talking about plagues, on the scale of COVID or much more than COVID. The Black Death wiped out a third of Europe. That's constant number two. Constant number three is famine. A constant of history is the weather is bad, you have a slight turn, the crops aren't good, and people die of mass starvation. What this author pointed out, and Murray, you made me think of this, is the change in, I would say, the last 100 years, maybe 200 years, which is also a teaching of Judaism, is this is not the way it should be. So a plague breaks out in Africa, Ebola, and we scramble to solve it. Our reaction isn't, well, it's just another plague. I didn't remember the name of the book, so I will try and remember that for next time.
Well, if it was a short history of the future by Warren Wagar, I took his
No,
class.
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
that's the
Okay, because it sounded familiar.
Yeah, it does sound familiar, but I'll find it. I have it right behind me somewhere. So in our time, war breaks out, and we have a League of Nations, then a United Nations, then we have peace conferences and so on. We just have this attitude that this is not the way things are supposed to be. So one or two more things about what we just saw. One of the things that I love about that song and that series is the importance of joy, that God would like us to be joyful. I love that idea. And even, the scene with the fiddler at the very end, the fiddler is smiling, this impish smile. And I get this almost sense that even though this terrible news is coming, is it okay still to be happy? Can I come along? I'm the joyous fiddler. And Tevye, of course, says yes. And of course, we have another just beautiful example of Tevye's relationship with God. Did you have to send news like this? Couldn't you choose someone else sometime? But still, thank you for sending a husband for my daughter. A very clear sense going on here that God is in control of everything. We can have a wonderful discussion of theology, but as far as Tevye is concerned, God is sending the good and the bad. So I want to have a minor digression here, that there is a Jewish tradition. I have a sermon on my website about this, an audio file for this sermon. I think it's David Wolpe wrote a book called the 7 Questions. And in Jewish traditions, a couple of different rabbis, a couple of different places, a tradition that you will be asked 7 questions when we meet our Maker in heaven. And when I do this as a sermon, I always like to ask what you would think the question God would ask you is. In this format, it's not going to work. So here are the 7 questions in the order, at least that they're in the book. Question number 1: did you deal honestly with people in your business practices? It's not so difficult to remember to light Shabbat candles. It's not so difficult if you're a traditional Jew to wrap the tefillin, to tie your tzitzit the correct way, to keep kosher. You may not have such great temptations to violate those. That's not what God is asking. God is asking, have you been honest in your business practices? Because it's much easier to cheat a little, to defraud. When I first gave this sermon, I used to say, God, who is the guy that did the huge multi-billion-dollar fraud? Now I can't remember.
Madoff.
Yeah, sorry, Bernie Madoff.
Madoff.
Bernie Madoff may have contributed to
Nazi.
tzedakah and so on,
Milken.
Milken also. Question number 2: did you busy yourself with procreation? So in a traditional sense, this is having children. In a less traditional sense, teachers are said to be the spiritual parents of their children. Question number 3: did you set times for Torah study? It's always very easy to say, well, I'll study Torah when I have time. Even Tevye, very, very busy, would set times when he could study Torah. Question number 4: did you hope for deliverance? God is going to ask us whether we're primarily optimists or pessimists, and with the implication that we're supposed to be hopeful. Tevye, at the height of his joy, the fear of the oncoming pogrom, still is fundamentally optimistic, and you'll see that fiddler at the very end, spoiler alert. Did you seek wisdom, and did you understand one thing from another? Were you curious? Did you investigate? Here is my favorite one, which goes along with this theme. Were there earthly pleasures permitted to you that you did not enjoy? I love this one. The idea is that God has created for us a smorgasbord of wonderful stuff to do, food to taste, joys to have, including, physical pleasures, sexual pleasures, delicious food, time to study, time to connect, music, time to dance. God wants us to try all of them. Sorry, the word permitted pleasure is still in there. There are a bunch of pleasures in there that are forbidden, such things, as awful as pepperoni. But of the permitted pleasures, God wants us to have all of them. I think of it as a smorgasbord, or you don't have to eat everything, but you have to taste everything. And there's this wonderful story that I always tell about the head of yeshiva in Eastern Europe, who, a man of letters, a man that studies, practically 25 hours a day. And one day he announces to his yeshiva students, boys, we're going to go hike in the Alps. And his students are shocked. The master, the Rosh Yeshiva, is not exactly an athlete. And he says, they say to him, Rabbi, what's up with this? Why are we going to go hike in the Alps? And he says to the boys, he says, it just occurred to me, when I go from this world to the next world, and God says to me, "Nu, so what did you think of my Alps?" What am I going to say? So I love that Judaism is not ascetic, that Judaism doesn't praise denial. Yes, you have to give to charity, but a specific amount. You fast on fast days. There are plenty of rules, but you're not supposed to remove the intrinsic joy. And the last one was, were you? Were you true to yourself? And there's lots of stories from Jewish tradition. One where a man is facing God, and he's very upset because he says to God, "I'm ashamed of myself because I wasn't as great as Moses." And he said, I didn't need, God says to him, I didn't need another Moses. I needed you. And another one, which is quite beautiful, is someone dies and passes to the next world, and he is, he's complaining to God. He says, we have all these problems in the world. Things are just terrible. There's hunger, there's famine, there's war, there's hatred, and so on. Why didn't you send someone to help us? And God's response is, of course, I did. And the guy said, you did? What are you talking about? He said, I sent you. So I love that one. Let's see if there's something else. The other thing which I just have to mention is that I think some of you saw in the documentary, which is on Amazon Prime, Lin-Manuel Miranda was getting married, and he realized, he says in the interview, that the song To Life was the only father-in-law, son-in-law song that he's ever heard of. And so he staged an amazing surprise on his bride that has since gone viral on YouTube. You can see it. And he says there were so many comments that he received about what a wonderful Jewish couple he and his bride are. And he says he's Puerto Rican and Mexican, and his wife is Dominican and Austrian, and the only religion he takes seriously is musical theater. So I got a kick out of that.
That's really good.
We will have one more clip. I'm gonna mute everybody again, and I'm gonna try and do this. I am gonna pause. I am turning back on the recording. So we just saw the song Miracle of Miracles, and some great dialogue. Again, this issue of stretching the border. And I love on one hand, on another hand, I can't remember which president it was that wished he could have a one-handed economist, because every time he asked his economic advisors for input on a particular problem, the response of the economist would be, well, on one hand, it'll do this, this, and this, and this, but on the other hand, it'll do that, that, and that. And this guy said, I need a one-handed economist. Just tell me what to do. But what you saw there also is very Talmudic. If you've studied Talmud, they're analyzing all the sides of the argument. That's exactly what Tevye is doing. I'm not a student of film, but I love the photography about how far away Tevye is from his daughter and from the tailor. I also love the line of the tailor that even a poor tailor deserves a little happiness. That is an inspirational line. And then we get to miracles. So I'm going to call on Horowitz clan. You got your hand up. While you think about what is a miracle.
Well, I wasn't thinking about that so much. I was going back to Tevye's relationship with God. And when it came down to what he's going to tell Golda now that he's made this decision that they can get married, he doesn't just say, what am I going to tell Golda? He looks up and asks God, like he's asking for an answer. What am I going to tell Golda?
Exactly. And again, this is the developing and wonderful relationship between Tevye and God, because even in the discussion, he's looking up. It's not entirely an internal discussion. He is discussing this with God, which, by the way, I recommend this concept to you. If you've got difficult decisions, if you're facing terrible problems, or if you just want to have a good spiritual habit, talk to God. And one of my teachers would say, here's how you do it. You find a place where it's quiet, where you won't be disturbed. Put your head in your hands, your head down, and just talk to God. And the main difficulty in this process is not continually observing yourself talking to God. You have to restrain yourself from the internal debate. Do I really believe in God? What do I believe in God? What's the nature of God? What's the nature of Judaism? What about other religions? Shut up. Don't talk about that stuff. You're talking to God. I often say, if you analyze that stuff, it's like, think about the first time you were in the arms of the person who becomes your deepest love, and you're dancing and you're hugging and you're stroking, and it's just fantastic. Now you start thinking, well, what's the source of this attraction? Is it pheromones? Is it some sort of biochemical marker that is bringing us together? Is this Darwinian evolution? What's the nature of bonding? And if you're thinking about that, he or she is going to be off soon dancing with another person. I think of this as the relation. Prayer is to theology. I should say theology is to prayer as a menu is to the meal. I love theology, and certain menus are very interesting, but there's a time to pray. And when you pray, you have to shut out the voices that are interfering with your talking to God. So as I think about this, both as a rabbi and a physicist, there's two possibilities. Possibility number one is you are really having a moment, as Tevye is, talking to God. And that's very, very powerful. Option number two is you are speaking the deepest truths of your soul and your life. Because as crazy as the idea of talking to God is, the idea of lying to God is even crazier. So if you are legitimately embracing the concept that now I'm going to be speaking with God, you will be speaking the deepest truths of your life, and that's not chopped liver. As you listen to yourself speak these truths, it's very powerful. This I am certain of from my own experience. So the other wonderful thing here is the question of what is a miracle? And the rabbis of the Talmud were actually very uncomfortable with the concept of miracles. It's an interesting idea. Why were they uncomfortable with the concept of miracles? Because of the experience that we celebrate in Hanukkah worked really, really well. Remember Hanukkah? How we defeated the Greek Syrians and the oil lasted and so on. But the rabbis who are writing the Talmud have just gone through 2, and some historians would say 3, unsuccessful revolts against Rome. And the result is a Holocaust. There were as many percentage of Jews killed in the aftermath of the revolt against Rome as in the Holocaust. And the rabbis didn't want Jews relying on miracles to help. They basically said, no, we're gonna go off. I talked about this last time, and be our own separate people. So but there are miracles in the Bible, and the rabbis would never say they didn't happen. So the rabbis said these miracles, the waters splitting and various other things were built into the fabric of creation. Even Balaam, even the talking donkey in the story of Balaam, all of these miracles were created. I can't remember if it's the first day of creation. I think it's the 6th day of creation. So don't rely on miracles anymore. But I love the idea of miracles. Miracles, I don't believe in miracles that violate the laws of physics, but I believe things are miraculous. I believe, the usual things, the birth of a child is miraculous. Finding the person you love is miraculous. And having said that, there's a story in the Talmud about finding the person you love, very much along the lines of this song. And a Roman matron, non-Jewish, is arguing or discussing with a rabbi. And she asks him, so, okay, you've told me all the stories. This God of yours, what has God been doing since creation? And the response is, and I often talk about this during weddings, the response is, the most important and difficult and significant job of God since creation is matchmaking, is finding exactly the right chatan, bridegroom, for the right kala. And the Roman matron says, that's absurd. I have, male slaves and female slaves. Watch, I will match them up. And she matches them up. And she says, you're married to this one, you're married to this one, you're married to this one, and sends them off. The next day, they've got scratches and bruises, and the coupling hasn't gone so well. And she finally has to admit that, yes, I understand. So I will call on Bryce.
Yeah, so the idea that all of these miracles are baked into creation from the beginning, and that implies, at least to me, that all of creation unwinds like a clockwork, and that none of the people that were involved in everything that led up to one of these miracles had any choices.
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, you can still have free choice. And the question is, how is it that the sea split? And I think what the rabbis were really concerned about is if you really believe God will save us, as God saved us at the Sea of Reeds, as God saved us in the Hanukkah story, you know, the rabbis kept the books of Maccabees out of the Bible. I don't know if you know this.
Yeah.
The books of Maccabees are Jewish books. They were translated into Greek. And the rabbis were uncomfortable with relying on God's miracles to save the Jews. On the other hand, people loved Hanukkah and they were celebrating it. So the rabbis discovered, I won't cast any doubt on this discovery, the rabbis discovered about 500 years after the event that the real miracle of Hanukkah was the miracle of the oil lasting 8 days, because the rabbis were uncomfortable with us relying on miracles. So what they said was, in effect, what they're saying is, yes, we have the Bible, and we, the rabbis, can't go against the stories in the Bible, but don't rely on them. You know, God works through us. Jerry.
So it's a very good point that Bryce just made, but I'm thinking, isn't a miracle by default the unexpected?
Yeah, a miracle could be the unexpected in timing.
But I mean, contrary to what could have just happened, unfolded naturally, something different happened, whether it's a perceived difference or, you know, an unnatural event like parting the Red Sea, for example.
Yeah, so the parting of the Red Sea, you know, you will find attempts to explain all of the plagues and the miracles of Egypt as natural consequences. So people have analyzed, you know, in a particular area, that if the tide was very low and you had a wind blowing from this direction, that in fact it could have, you could have had enough dry land to escape. But of course, the way the story is told in the Bible, it happened at exactly the right time. So that's the miracle. I just want to highlight, I watched this today carefully and took notes, all the biblical images that Mazel talks about. Daniel in the lion's den, Jericho and the walls falling down, Moses and Pharaoh. I want to point out some of them he gets exactly wrong. He says when Moses softened Pharaoh's heart, nobody softens Pharaoh's heart. God hardens Pharaoh's heart, but it makes a nice story. The parting of the sea, making a man from a lump of clay, clearly, you know, refers back to the Garden of Eden. Going to the promised land, David and Goliath, and manna in the wilderness. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that song, and it actually points out how knowledgeable and literate Mazel is. Mazel is a traditional Jew. You know, we're going to see a hierarchy with the daughters. The revolution of Zeitel is that she doesn't marry the daughter that the father has picked out, Laser Wolf. The revolution of the middle child is she marries this revolutionary who shaves and is out to save the world and is going to be, you know, locked up in Siberia rather than living in the village and living a traditional life. And of course, the youngest isn't going to marry a Jew at all. So you have this progression of revolution that's going to take place. Okay, it is about 8:30. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut off the recording. So if people want to express opinions that they don't necessarily want to have live on YouTube forever,